cut price MiSTer is here. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
30 years without chicken lips.
Life support for video games.
And Mr. Cheapskate.
All these stories and a whole lot more coming up on today's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello everyone, it's another week on This Week in Retro, and joining us today is John Chucky Hurtle. Well known in the Amiga world, he's created such wonders as the Amiga 1200, a reverse-engineered A1200 with lots of extras thrown on there. Likewise, the 4000, and a whole lot more besides. Chucky is a good egg. Welcome to the show, Chucky.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. It's traditional for us to just kind of chat about what we've been up to this week before we go into the stories. Dave, what have you been up to? Preferably retro, but anything goes.
I don't know. I don't think I've done anything retro this week. It feels like 5 minutes since we last recorded. I've not had a breath all week. I've been trying to buy a new shed. So that's what I've been doing this week in my spare time.
Kind of retro. Sheds are kind of retro.
Yeah, I guess it is. I'm not going to use it in a kind of a hideaway type thing. It's just going to be for storage in my back garden, but really nothing in the past week.
Yeah. Dot's making some noise behind you. Is she trying to get out? She's meowing at the door.
What she does is she closes the door and then complains, and eventually Johnny goes and opens it for her.
Oh, okay. He can open the door.
He can open the door. She can close it.
What a team. John, are you a man with a shed, or is that your workship we can see behind you?
This is my workshop. I live in a flat, so I have no sheds or anything. Just, a big,
what have you been working
room.
on? What have you been working on this week?
This week, actually, I've been helping Terrible Fire with the TF4060 that is about to be released.
Imminent.
Nice.
Yes, so that's the big thing.
Yeah. So TF is Terrible Fire. Stephen Leary, who lives quite close to me, he has produced a range of Amiga accelerators. The TF4060 is his crowning glory. It's one for the Amiga 4000 and puts an 060 in and makes it fast enough to almost play Doom.
Almost. Fantastic. I've had another busy week in the cave. I'm about to go in today and finish the filming for the computer space video. Really looking forward to revealing that, the 3D printed computer space. That is running a MiSTer inside it, which will be one of our stories today. We're talking about MiSTers. The episode, it will be out when this show goes live on Saturday morning. So do check it out, because Richard from Hebo has put a huge amount of work into this computer space recreation and a huge amount of time. And I think the result is superb. So
the paint job is finished.
The paint job is finished, and the resin job. Now, the resin is the bit everyone said would be impossible. How do you resin coat a large object without all the resin just dripping off? So in the video, Richard explains his experiments, how he came up with the formula that worked, and then we watch him resin coat a massive 3D print. Yeah. No spoilers,
Amazing.
Dave.
Amazing. I know. I'm excited to see it. It's incredible that you managed to produce something even that looks approximately like computer space, never mind something that when you did the scans is identical to it, and then you get the finish. It's just incredible.
Yeah, that's all covered in the video too. And the best bit about it is when you stand in front of it and you play it and you go, yeah, this is a terrible game. I understand why this was not a successful arcade, but that's part of the experience. You're experiencing it in a cabinet in situ next to Pong, and then you walk sideways and play Pong, and you go, right, that's why that was successful. I understand that game. That's simple. And computer space is a bit overly complex, a bit intimidating, weird control panel. It's a very important lesson, and it's great to have in the arcade, I think.
Yeah, overambitious perhaps is what the way to describe it. People didn't quite catch people the same way that Pong did. Yeah.
John, are you an arcade gamer? Do you have a favorite arcade game?
No, actually, never was into gaming, weirdly enough. For me, it was just the demo scene on the C64, and the Amiga.
Yep.
So I never really played any real games.
Sure.
I don't know
Okay.
why. My kids play it all the time, but no.
You just enable us to play games with your hardware project.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, should we get into this week's stories?
Sure.
Let's go.
On the 29th of April, 1994, the number one record in the US charts was Prince, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. Over in the UK, it was Bump and Grind from R. Kelly. But meanwhile, in Sweden, it was Without You from Mariah Carey. And I think the Swedes had their finger on the pulse with an appropriate song, because also on the 29th of April, 1994, budget computer manufacturer Commodore International declared voluntary liquidation of itself and its subsidiary Commodore Electronics. They were a business founded in Nassau in the Bahamas in 1976, but that's not really representative of what they were. That company had existed for a couple of decades already, the result of Jack Tramiel and Irving Gould's expanding typewriter repair business, which they started in New York in the Bronx a couple of decades before. By May the 6th, 1994, it seems that liquidation had started, and that's when Wikipedia notes Commodore as being gone. Jack Tramiel had actually left the company, shall we say, under a cloud in 1984, resigning and leaving Gould in charge. Tramiel would, of course, go on to buy the home computer rights from Atari and make the fantastic Atari ST. And sadly, while Atari didn't have precisely the same fate as Commodore, it did, of course, go more or less the same way. Commodore peaked in the early 80s. Their Commodore 64 was a fantastic proposition that came out at just the right time. It contained a powerful chipset that managed a modest price and was marketed well enough that it was ubiquitous in most areas. It didn't catch on quite the same way in the UK because of the success of the ZX range from Sinclair.
Yeah, but it was still a very popular system in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not lump it in with the Dragon 32s and the Oric 1s of the world. C64 was popular in the UK.
Yeah. It just a little bit of a anomaly because of the success of the ZX Spectrum here pushed it out a little bit. However, once Tramiel left Commodore, they weren't really able to ever catch their breath. They lurched forward trying to make money and release new products, but were plagued with problems. Whipping the Amiga out from under the nose of Atari, they launched another fantastically powerful machine with a tremendously powerful chipset. However, they either didn't have the money or didn't spend it wisely and fumbled lots of things with the launch of it. But despite that, after a cost down, the Amiga 500 went on to become the dream machine for lots of teenagers in the UK and Europe and kept Commodore going. They later released other machines in the line, notably the Amiga 1200 and the CD32, but ultimately lacked the financial might to support the launch of a new major platform, which wasn't in any way unique. Sinclair, Amstrad, Atari, and loads of others had exactly the same problem. In fact, if you look at the successful launch of any platform from the 90s onwards, it needed massive, massive financial might to do it, and the confidence to spend gargantuan sums of money in a way that must have felt like wasting it for no return on developers, on marketing, and on aggressive pricing in the hopes that the platform gets traction.
So you're saying that just paying for a billboard outside Sega's office in London isn't enough when it comes to marketing, Dave?
Not quite. I always think that Commodore's mentality was that a successful launch was getting the box out of the warehouse, which might have done the job in the early 80s, but by the 90s, that was just the start of it. And if you look at what, Microsoft with their Xbox, what they had to spend, and the year or two that everyone's saying they're wasting the money it's now work on, they had to spend so much money just on getting it to stick. And there was no way that companies like Commodore and Atari could do that. But Neil, you're a subject matter expert here. You've interviewed...
No.
Yes, you are. Don't shake your head. You've interviewed lots of people and done lots of research and done lots of reading. Why did Commodore and the Amiga die? And is it really a big deal it died? Or maybe did the Amiga live on regardless?
Oh, what? You're trying to tell me the Amiga died, Dave? The Amiga never died. The Amiga never died. Yeah, there are so many stories about Commodore and their management incompetence, aren't there? Spending excess, disjointed thinking. The sad thing about the whole Commodore story is that they seem to have some of the best engineers in the world at the time with unique ideas. I mean, John will know better than me how good these engineers were or weren't with his experience, but they seem to have unique ideas on how to come up with cutting edge approaches to computer systems and not just create another IBM PC clone, although Commodore did do those as well. They seem to have a nice way of thinking. I actually think the Commodore 64 was both the making and the downfall of Commodore computers, because while the engineers were coming up with forward-thinking platforms, the management were measuring only boxes shifted, and nothing topped the Commodore 64 by that metrics. It sold so many computers. So they kind of kept the Commodore 64 on life support well into the 90s, when it should perhaps have been retired. All the focus should have been on the Amiga and maybe the PC ranges. But they were still bringing out things like the Commodore 64 GS in 1990. They were determined to try and keep the C64 alive and, keep those champagne days of 1983, 1984, 1985, all that money coming in when it just wasn't going to happen. And they kind of did it again with the Amiga. Instead of implementing the next generation of Amiga after the 500, they kept kind of hobbling it to get it out the door. They didn't stand behind it with confidence like, let's say, Apple do with their products. I was desperate for they were talking about the AAA chipset and what would come with that. And then we got this AGA kind of cut down version to get it out the door. So in summary, I'd say poor management, disjointed marketing, different goals in different arms of Commodore. There's lots of stories about Commodore Germany and Commodore USA not talking or working on the same product in contradictory ways and things like that. And a technology company led by executive ambitions rather than technical ones. I mean, engineers shouldn't really be in charge of a tech company. They've got a different skill set. But if they were better respected and listened to by management, I think we would have seen a slightly different roadmap. Whether that road would have led to the same dead end or success, I don't know. The march and the rise of IBM PC compatibles is pretty unstoppable, but Amiga could still have been a part of that, or Commodore a part of that, with expansion cards, if not systems themselves. There are lots of ways they could have done it. So difficult one to know how they've got. And one of the galling things is I often hear the story that Commodore UK was still a very profitable company when Commodore International went under. So there were still the seeds of potential there. Yeah.
But was that based on the money that had already been sunk into R&D elsewhere, and they were able to make profit by selling on what they hadn't really developed themselves?
Yeah, perhaps they didn't have the same overheads. They had a marketing budget. They had stock coming in, and they sold it. Yeah. Yeah, they sellotaped Batman to an Amiga and they sold them. Yeah.
John, you should know a few things about this.
Well, yeah. I think the downfall was that they never developed the AGA chipset more. I mean, the 1200, the CD32, the 4000 were basically the same machine. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the downfall, because the PC were advancing way faster. And I think Dave Haney actually told once that they should skip the Zorro expansion and do PCI and make it more so you can use expansion cards that the PC was using as well. And the downfall was that it was too enclosed system for the time.
Do you think they should have moved on from the Wedge? Do you think the 1200 should have been a desktop system?
Well, the 1200, maybe they should have some more memory on it, faster RAM or something like that, because it was severely stopped by having ship memories quite slow. So the people were not impressed of the speed that you could get. But they maybe should have cheaper 4000 that were a desktop version instead of having this big box that were quite expensive.
Big gap.
Yeah, it was too large of a gap.
I do like the idea of PCI expansions, because you're right, they could have tapped into a huge market of third-party things. You could have had your chunky graphics card in there if you wanted. You could have even maybe put a sound blaster in there if you wanted. Paula was great, but it was pretty old by the time the 1200 and the 4000 were around. So yeah, that's an interesting direction they could have taken. I agree.
It's strange because the Paula was never revised at all. It's the same version that on the 1000. So a big mistake there from them.
I kind of like that though, because I like going back to the A1000 from the mid 80s and popping a disc in and playing a Hoffman track with, someone singing on it in huge beats and going, oh my God, this mid 80s hardware was capable of this. I love that.
Yeah, I think that should never be underestimated with the Amiga. What they came out with in 1985 was years and years ahead in a time when things were moving really fast. What they came out with in 1985 was absolutely incredible. And unfortunately, they essentially rested on their laurels. There was very little. Even EGA wasn't a huge step forward from what was there in 1985. 30 years of Commodore being gone, but the Amiga leaves out
Commodore. Yeah.
30 years of Commodore being gone, and the Amiga still lives on. I like to see the Amiga died, but it didn't really die. It was kept alive by people like John at the demo scene, and it's now healthier than it's been in decades.
I'm going to bookmark you saying that, Dave, and I'm going to keep it forever.
When I'm beating on the Amiga, I'm only doing it for fun. I don't really mean it.
Today's show is kindly sponsored by our good friends at Pixel Addict magazine. Where do we buy that, Dave?
You buy it at pixel.addict.media.
And I am informed that this month, or today, because it's a daily magazine, isn't it? Our old friend Chris Winters, former host of the show, has had his crayons out, hasn't he, Dave?
Yeah, he sent me a message. He says, "Hey, mate, hope you're well. Pixel Addict has an article about the video pack called But I Wanted an Atari by Me, in case you want to mention it in a future sponsor slot, lol. Or not if you think it'll hurt sales, lol."
It's like he was in the room.
Yeah.
So, Chris has got his own article in Pixel Addict. I'm pretty sure John's had an interview in Pixel Addict. Have you been in there, Jackie, in Pixel Addict magazine?
No,
or maybe Amiga Addict?
No, but they have written some story about it, about my stuff, but no real.
I'm sure you're featured regularly.
Yeah, I have one. Maybe long. My memory is bad.
I'm sure you're in there.
Too much work. Yeah, but I was in. Yeah.
So I will read that article with interest. I don't know a huge amount about the Philips video pack, but I'm sure Chris will do a great job on covering that. Hope you're well, Chris. And you should all go to pixel.addict.media to buy yourself a copy online. I don't think it's in the shops anymore. So get it online, get yourself a subscription, and get a magazine delivered every hour.
Yeah. I'm told Duncan, our producer Duncan, had to do the proofreading for Chris. So my sympathies to Duncan for all that spelling correction.
The challenge of keeping old games alive, ensuring they are still playable when the online service they are tied to is taken out of service, is a hot topic, and it's only going to get hotter as the next generation becomes nostalgic for retro games. We're talking about games from an era where, even if it's a single-player game, you had to sign into a service to play it. It might be on PC, maybe an Xbox, maybe a PS3, maybe a Wii. I don't know. It's not really a platform-specific problem, this, unless that platform is the internet. That's really what it all comes back to. The example I always remember that really frustrated me was Codemasters Formula 1 2010, which you needed to sign into a service called Games for Windows Live. Remember that? And that was just to play a single-player game. And I had a very rural internet connection at the time, which meant sometimes I just couldn't get into the game because I couldn't get on the internet. Never mind wanting to play a multiplayer game. I just wanted to sit on my own and do laps, but I couldn't do it. But that was when that game was current. That was a new game. What if I'm nostalgic for it now? Now, Games for Windows Live has long since been retired, so can I still play it? Just one example. But this, of course, affects thousands of games and many online services. So I'm just picking out a personal example to me. Now, we mentioned some shows back that a petition was raised on petition.parliament.uk. That's the government's own website in which people in the UK can raise an issue. If it then reaches 10,000 signatures, it gets a response from the government. And if it reaches 100,000 signatures, it gets discussed in Parliament. Now, whether or not this is effective for a change, or if it's just a kind of hole on the internet to shout into to make you feel better, make you feel like you've done something, I don't know. That's a conversation for another day. Maybe it stops people setting fire to government buildings by feeling they've done something. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We'll park that. But this particular petition was titled, "Require Video Game Publishers to Keep Games They Have Sold in a Working State." And it's reached just over 17,000 signatures, and it can still be signed today. So we'll put a link in the show notes if you are wanting to sign it, and you do need to be a UK resident to sign that. I'd be interested to know if there are any similar petitions, similar movements going on in other parts of the world as well that other people can sign, because I think, it's very much an international conversation. So the government have responded as it got over 10,000 signatures, and I'll give you the thrust of the response from them. Here are the key points. They say, consumers should be aware that there is no requirement in UK law compelling software companies and providers to support older versions of their operating systems, software, or connected products. There may be occasions where companies make commercial decisions based on the high running costs of maintaining older servers for video games that have declining user bases. However, video game sellers must comply with existing consumer law. It then goes on to talk about consumer expectations when purchasing a game, those expectations being set out clearly on the packaging. And it says, if consumers are led to believe that a game will remain playable indefinitely for certain systems, despite the end of physical support, the CPRS may require that the game remains technically feasible, for example, available offline, to play under those circumstances, the CPRS being the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations, and not the People's Front. It then covers off a bunch of stuff about digital content being of satisfactory quality, updates to digital content delivering according to your expectations and not changing. For example, you can't buy Call of Duty and then an update change the whole thing suddenly into Barbie's dating simulator. That goes against your consumer rights. So things like that can't happen. But in summary of this response, if the expectation is set when a game is sold, then that it will always be playable, then that should be delivered on. If not, and which company in their right mind is going to promise that something will be indefinitely playable if it relies on online services, so they just won't put it on the packaging. If not, here's a bowl of lemons, pick one, have a suck on it. That's basically how I read the response to this. And so, as we so often see, it's piracy to the rescue. In the specific example of Codemasters F1 2010, there is a workaround. It involves downloading a cracked DLL for the Windows Live service, and then you can bypass the login and get playing. But we as consumers shouldn't be dependent on a game being popular enough to get the attention of a cracker, and we shouldn't be putting our security in the hands of dodgy patches to play them and everything that might bring with them. It's not a result, but it is at least a conversation that's being had off the back of this petition. And I don't think, even if we put the shout out there, Dave, that our little community is about to get 100,000 signatures on it to escalate it into the House of Lords. But
I think probably 16,000 of those 17,000 were down to us.
Oh, yes. Yeah. 10,000 was just me refreshing.
Yeah.
So I would ask that you go into the video notes, click on the link and sign the petition if you're in the UK. It's quite a small number, 17,000 of UK gamers that have signed that. We know there are millions of you out there, so it'd be great if there were more signatories on there. Dave, what do you make of the response from the government? I know you're a big fan of the government.
I'm not going to touch that with a barge pole, Neil. Absolutely not going to touch that with a barge pole. On the good side of things, the response has been written by someone who at least knows what they're talking about. So it's not just a derisory nonsense thing they've gone. So at least it did get some attention. It's a reasonable response, but it points to existing organisations and existing legislation rather than recognising a need for new legislation or a new interpretation of existing legislation, which would then form a precedent, which would then be expected to apply to games. And maybe that's right for the UK, maybe it's not. Maybe this will point down the road of trading standards, which will eventually form a precedent which says you can't sell a game and then 2 years later invalidate all those purchases. You have to do something. You have to keep it on for a certain length of time, or maybe perhaps, or when you do take it offline, you have to make the server side of things available for people if they want to spin up their own server. I don't think, in fact, I'm certain that games companies are not going to self-police, and they're not going to end up leaving us with the legacy of games to play, because as soon as it costs them more to keep a game alive than it does to drop it forever, they will drop it. So they'll keep selling us the game, and then when it costs more to run the servers, however much they cost, they will just drop them. And what we've seen for games of the early noughties is where there wasn't really an online component, but they used online digital rights management, where it cost them even buttons to leave that server online because they weren't selling the game. They just dropped it. So it cost them almost nothing, and they said, no, almost nothing is too much for us to pay. So I hope that this does change. I can't mention this week without talking about the big gaming controversy of the week. It's a modern one, and it's Helldivers 2. It's a phenomenally popular game. I've never played it myself, but it's published by Sony and sold on Steam for PC, and it has been for 6 months. They announced that with the next update, you'll need a PlayStation account to play it, which means signing up for a PlayStation account. Anger ensued because people don't want to sign up for all these extra accounts, but signing up for the extra account is a minor thing compared to the problem if you're in one of the 177 countries and territories where you can't sign up.
Is that a free account, assuming you're in a country where you can sign up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're not saying
that's not the
you
issue.
need to pay $8.99 a month to continue to play. No, they need to sign up for the account. You shouldn't need to sign up for an account, but for 177 countries and territories, according to the news, you cannot sign up for an account. So Steam then took it off sale for all of those countries and territories, and then finally Sony have come out with the very predictable, oh, sorry, we won't do this, lessons learned, blah, 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 you don't need a PSN account to play this. So these kind of things seem to happen all the time with gaming, and then the company does a 180, and then later they do another 180 and they do it on their next launch. You will need a PSN for it, but you'll know that at the time you buy it.
And all of that, Dave, feeds into another problem when you come and you want to play a retro game in 20 years' time, and you've got the original media, and then all these changes and updates have happened since that original media. How do you get the game to a state where it's playable as you remember it? Yeah.
If it does need a login for PlayStation Network or Rockstar or any one of these services, you then have all this chain of events that need to be satisfied before you can play the game. And if you're 10 or 15 or 20 years later, one of those breaking down is enough to stop it. So it's the same problem that we have been caused. And it also shows the attitude that they have towards people who buy their products. This is a global campaign, though, and it's designed to get attention, to make governments and organisations think about these things and either set a precedent or put new legislation in place. We don't know what the eventual outcome will be, but every time any legislator reads or hears about it, then I think it makes it more likely that something will happen which will solve it. And ultimately, the successful outcome of this is just simply for when companies launch a game, they need to make plans at that point for what happens to the legacy of the game when it comes to the end of its commercial, life. They make plans at the start of it, and that way they just slide them into place. Whether that's the release of the server code, whether it's a promise to keep it online for 5 years after the last purchase has been made, or 3 years after the last inline purchase has been made. Whatever they do, something needs to happen that way. And once it's been done with one game in one territory, there's no reason why they would have a rule for that applies in the European Union and then just not put it into place for the whole world.
And we know this is possible with even very complex games. For example, before the show, Dave, we were just talking about Outlands, Ultima Online Outlands, which is a shard to play Ultima Online, a game that God knows when EA stopped supporting that game. It's a very old game. But there are thousands of players on this community-led shard or server for an online game. And they're all happily, peacefully well, maybe not all peacefully. Some of them are having it out in the PvP places, but playing that game just as they did when the game was launched, with updates and things ever since. So we know it's possible. And that wasn't even a game that was made with that intention. They didn't set out and say, one day this will become publicly available.
Nor would you expect it either. It's a subscription-based game, so once they once they decide to stop doing it, stop taking your money, then you would expect it to come to a close. So it's not even the one that we would expect to continue.
But as you say, if protections are in place and that expectation is there from the design of the game at the very start, then that's better for consumers long term. John, I know you're not a great gamer, but do you have any opinions on this, on the law in general here, and how it's looking?
Well, I've been thinking of it actually, because at work I have a client here that have a big game collection. Maybe heard about the Embracer game collection.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
It's just 2 kilometers from here. So I've been thinking when visiting them that they will not be able to keep that collection because newer games will not be playable, and that's really sad. So I really hope there will be some solution of that, because even if I'm not playing games, I mean, it's sad to see. I mean, that collection is huge and impressive, and that will not be possible in the future. So it's weird. I mean, my kids, they play modern games that they will never be able to launch their PlayStation later and play more or less any of the games that they have, physical games.
Yeah, it's funny. I wonder if all of this will be sorted out and consumer law will come in place and will be protected. And then from that point on, this will be all done with longevity in mind. But maybe we'll have this 20-year gap in gaming history of games that we can't play. We'll have this black hole in the history of gaming, maybe.
Yeah, it's sad.
The Embracer collection that you mentioned, it's incredibly impressive. And one of the things that impresses me the most is the beautiful furniture they have. They have these great big white cabinets that all the games go in. And, you know, they've got the great big wheels on the end, so you can like turn them to slide the whole bookcase down the room, and it clunks up against the next one and you get access to the next part of the archive. What I wouldn't give for that.
Who would have thought Swedes would have good furniture?
Well, yes.
Yeah, weird.
Embracer, however, also own many of the game studios that produce these games, so that's a possibly something they could go out and solve themselves and say, here is our promise that when you buy a game from us, this is what you will be left with perpetually when we drop support for it.
Yeah, it will go into our archive. It will forever be playable. I would like to see a lot more tech companies take the stance of preservation, whether it's hardware, whether it's games, whatever it is. I'd like to see them protect their legacy. Yeah.
The only way they'll do that, though, is at the product launch as a kind of here's a reason to buy it. They won't do it once there's no money coming in. There's no reason for them to do it.
Yeah, without legal pressure. It's just marketing, isn't it? Yeah. Well, that's where we stand today. The link to the petition is in the show notes. So, as I said,
we're sitting down. Sorry, Neil. All three of us are sitting down just now.
That's where we sit today. The link is in the show notes. Go and sign it. I'd be fascinated to see it discussed in Parliament and who stands up and who tries to contribute to a discussion in Parliament, who tries to twist it to their own ends. So we know how it all goes in there, but the conversation needs to continue. And as I said, I'd be very interested to hear if these conversations are happening in your country and how they're going, whether they're being dismissed or whether they're actually starting to, whether the seeds are starting to produce anything at all. And no doubt we will revisit it again in a future show.
I'd like to welcome in two new twirlers, two new patrons. We have Jason and Scott, who have both signed up. Thank you very much for becoming twirlers.
Thank you, guys.
Jason and Scott. Evan B. Thompson, let us know in the comments, in case you find it interesting, and I did find it interesting, in case you find it interesting how people watch the show, for me, it's at the gym running on the treadmill. You're helping me keep fit. Thank you.
Come on, Evan. Tap it up if you can go faster. You can beat that PB today. Come on. You got this, Evan.
There's a few comments about Neil's Pong joke from last week, and yes, it did go right over my head.
Yes, I enjoyed
both
that.
Neil and I love putting a little joke in, and it's a bonus if the audience get it, but the other person doesn't get it. So that's the ideal for us. The more of the audience that get it, if Neil doesn't get it, then the better for me. And I'm surprised that nobody went mad about the Amiga being called ugly. I'm impressed with your restraint, which is why I did a little bit more trolling this week on saying the Amiga died. Dead. R.I.P.
What's in your briefs this week, Dave?
From Marin Bala is a link to their own blog article about an Atari ST demo scene history on books. It's a summary of what's out there to read. You'll remember we talked about the ST Amiga Flame War book, but there are plenty more to read on this subject, and reading this will help you choose the right one.
From 42 Nobody 42, thank you for submitting this story about a BBC Breakfast segment on gaming talks about finding a Game Boy in a phone box before going on to talk about various Nintendo consoles. I've not seen that. Is that news, Dave? Somebody finds a Game Boy in a phone box? Does that become national news?
No, it was just they were going on to segment, and they asked the person doing the weather, "Do you like playing games?" And she said, "Well, only retro games." And I've got a Game Boy I found. She's still got it, that she found in a phone box
Nice.
in the 90s.
Fantastic.
From Dr. Local, a list of 10 of the best nostalgic retro board games that you can still buy new today. So it's things like Othello and Battleships, etc., rather than the more complicated kind of modern in-depth board games that you see people play for hours with lots of lovely, intricate pieces.
Another submission from Dr. Local. A US arcade will now allow gambling on the outcome of their arcade machines for small amounts. This is Dave and Buster's restaurant and arcade bar. It's kind of an all-in-one venue with kids' parties and that kind of things. And you can go and gamble on arcade game outcomes. I guess it's esports.
It's on games of skee ball and stuff. So it's
okay.
I'm not sure. Apparently, the US is having this wave of gambling spread. Their gambling laws are tighter than they are in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like in Sweden, but the gambling is spreading all over the US, and that's what's happening now. You'll go to these kind of. It's not our type of arcade. It's not a barcade type thing. It's a family type place you would go to. And they're now introducing arcade betting on their app on the outcome of some games you might play.
So it's like going down to Frankie and Benny's and having dinner with the family and then having a flutter. Gamble responsibly, kids.
Yeah,
what else have we got, Dave?
If I'm playing you a game of something, I can gamble without using an app. I'll bet you a fiver, Neil, and that's it.
I'm just happy to beat you, Dave. Just happy to see your tears. That's
I'm happy to
price.
take your fivers. From Pajako, Cindy is 60 years old. Cindy is a British fashion doll created as a rival to Barbie, and indeed had some legal rivalry going on with Barbie across the years. Do you remember Cindy?
Did Cindy have a boyfriend, an equivalent of Ken? Was it like Ben or something?
Neil. I think it was Neil. Neil, okay.
From Squelch411, there's a Guardian article stating that the internet is in decline and needs rewilding. It's actually talking about how it's been carved up by corporations rather than the free, wild, diverse internet that we had in the late 90s. I mean, we all remember the internet as it was when we first started using it. The rings, the web rings, the personal websites we made, the complete lack of continuity from site to site because we just used HTML and Notepad and did whatever the hell we wanted. And now we've talked about this before on the show. We visit so few websites. We just visit the same websites again and again and again. And it's just not like it used to be.
It's like what they've done to the Strip in Las Vegas. They don't want you out the strip. It's all commercial. You don't leave the commercial strip. So you'll be in Facebook, Reddit, news sites, all the rest of it, and you won't be on. You won't as often go on to an independent site created entirely in isolation of all elements.
Do you know what my favorite website is?
No, Neil. What's your favorite website?
It's wordpress.hurtle.nu. Which is John's WordPress website with all of his updates. His latest one, building Amiga 4000 CR cost reduced part 2. And he talks about his development of his boards, updated on the 15th of the 4th. So just a couple of weeks ago. This is very much an active website, John.
Well, not that active, but yeah, I'll try to do every build, etc. I will maybe do it more actively, actually.
Yeah, some nice updates, lots of photos. Yeah. Lots of technical detail about what you're working on. Yeah. Duncan, put a link in the show notes. wordpress.hurtle.nu. Carry on, Dave.
Okay. Also from Bajako, it seems Basic's 60th birthday is around now, and he's linked an article with 3 modern Basic new releases.
And from Senor By 445.
Senor.
I did mention when I made the Commodore PC, I wonder if anyone will come and do a speed run of a text adventure. Well, yeah, that is a thing. Zork 1 speed run record is 2 minutes and 53 seconds. And there is a link to the obsessively complete Infocom catalogue.
Yeah, so he's submitted 2 links. So there's a link to the speedrun and also a link to the obsessively complete Infocom catalogue, which is a wonderful website. I use it myself. You can get pretty much, you can get any edition of any Infocom game in the Z Machine format. So the Z Machine format is the language they use to write the games, and they had various editions. They maybe did some bug fixes. They added some hints, for example. You can download whichever version you want to play it on various different engines on different machines. So, for example, you might want to play it on your Android phone in the train onto work. You might want to play it on your Aegon. You might want to play it on your PCW. Or if Neil does find one, I'm sure one must exist for DOS, you could set it up on the PC20. So rather than the PC20 having individual games installed there, you might have an engine and then the individual game files you picked up from this catalogue.
Yeah, the original interpreter was like that. I love it when you load up Hitchhiker's Guide or Zork. It reads the data in and it goes loaded 320 pages or 280 pages, and that's your interactive text adventure. That's how many pages you've got to work through, which I really like.
And that's why it works, because Infocom did make the game files for obvious reasons. I mean, you can see if they're releasing it on several platforms, and it makes sense to create a single game file and then the engine to run it. So that's what this is continuing with, and the catalogue allows you to get that. But not just all that, it has all the feelies and blouses. There's more, yeah. Not just this. And if you buy now, you'll get a second one for no. It has all this and all the feelings and so on. If you're going to play an Infocom game, then it will greatly help you enjoy it and help you with your imagination gap.
There's lots more stories like this that we aren't covering in full detail today, but you can go and browse at your leisure. Did you know we have over 2,000 members of our subreddit now, which is fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being an active part of that community. Go and check it out at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Use it as your source for news, submit news for us to discuss, and just be excellent to one another.
Yeah, I'm pleased that we're now at the point where I think we can say, if you want to go and see what's happened this week in retro, you can look at our website, and there'll be lots of, sorry, not our website, our subreddit, because it's not an individual website, because that's how the internet's gone. You can look at our subreddit and you can see lots and lots of things to keep you busy and entertained.
Yeah, don't even listen to the show. Just read the subreddit.
No, the show's rubbish. Rubbish. 3 bald men talking nonsense.
Yeah.
MiSTer seems to be the gold standard in emulation, but it's not cheap. A large part of that cost is the DE10 Nano board itself. I paid £110 for one in 2009. That's when I bought my first one. And the price is now
2019, not 2009, Dave.
2019.
Yeah, you said 2009.
Did I? I meant 2019. Thank you for correcting me there.
You're welcome.
I paid £110 in 1910 when I bought my first one. The price is now £200, so it's almost doubled in price. And on top of that, for a long period of time during the chip shortages, they were just simply unobtainium.
It's a dark period. It was horrible. Yeah.
So let's step back a bit from that and talk about what MiSTer is in general, because it's been a while since we talked about MiSTer on this show. And I want people to understand what it is. It's an evolution of the MIST project, which was the Atari, ST, and Amiga cores. And Alexei, known as Sorgeleg, Melnikov, in 2017 took that project and turned it into MiSTer. The project gives the user a menu on which are many different cores listed. The core is a console, or it's a microcomputer, or an arcade machine, and you can launch the core for, let's say, 1942 and play 1942, or launch the Minimig core, and then you can configure your hard disk, add a floppy disk, and play Hybris on your Amiga, or you can launch the Super Nintendo and play Sonic Super World or Mario or whatever it's called. I refuse to get it right. Lots of different cores there. It's exploded in popularity, and Neil, you first covered it in 2019 when it was really becoming more mainstream in the retro world. It was really getting lots of attention then. Back then it did lots of 8 and 16-bit micros and consoles. Probably it already did most of the ones that people would want back then, and a fair number of arcade machines, but certainly not at that point, a complete range of arcade machines. Talks about what the limits of it were, turned out to have been very pessimistic, and it's now gone on to do what people said it would do, and then much, much more. It's got almost all of the arcade games that I would want to play, and it's got more complex consoles like the PlayStation, and there's a PC core for DOS gaming that's very competent.
Yeah, I know you just rewinding a bit there, you said it was mainstream in the retro world. I'd say it's popular. I wouldn't call it mainstream. I haven't seen it on my high street just yet, Dave.
Yeah, and that's something I should perhaps be aware that I'm guilty of, assuming everyone knows what it is and everyone knows about it. No, it's certainly very popular. I think more people know about it now than they did in 2019, and more people knew about it in 2019 than almost anyone did in 2017.
Yeah. When Dua Lipa starts singing about it, we can call it mainstream, Dave, but not just yet.
When I know who that is, we can call her mainstream.
I don't even know who that is.
I know she's a singer. I don't know any more than that. It works by trying to recreate. I'm going to get comments in this next bit. It works by trying to recreate the hardware with an FPGA, which is a field programmable gate array. So typically, an emulator in software on your PC will be more focused on producing the correct output, while MiSTer cores are more focused on trying to create the components with the idea that the output will follow if you emulate all the component parts of the machine. There is, however, plenty of crossover and trying to nail down exactly what FPGA emulation is and what other emulation is and what they aren't, and precise rules for definitions is difficult. You might hear people say that MiSTer isn't really emulation. You might hear people say it's simulation rather than emulation. It's a bit wishy-washy. There's no hard and fast definitions you can stick to that I can think of.
It's one thing emulating another thing.
Yeah. Back at the start, I told you about the £200 or $250 or 2,700 Swedish krona, if you like, the DE10 board that MiSTer is based around. It's a development board, and it was never intended to be used as a consumer device like this. But it does do the job, and slapping it into the traditional MiSTer stack, or indeed the I think superior multi-system, gives you a very workable, complete solution. Well, I bought them, but
Don't
I've
have
got a
to say
multi-system
that.
that's better. No, but it is. I think it's better. That's my opinion. You're not paying me. Someone has actually someone has actually made a clone of the DE10 board. So the DE10 board is the expensive part, and someone's made a nearly one-to-one clone of it. It's fully compatible with the MiSTer device. You can just slot it in instead of the DE10. There's a few minor changes to the hardware, but none are deal breakers, and in fact, they're probably mild improvements. The power regulation is better. It will set 12 volts instead of 5 volts. It uses less power to do the same stuff. The cost, however, is meant to be $99, which is £80 or 1,000 Swedish krona. That's a huge price cut. And not only that, but the RAM is cut in price too, from $60 down to $15.
Is that the price on the shelf, or does that include some educational discount like the original D10 did, or is that's just the price it's going to be?
So that's the price that they say it's going to be. So this is based on a submission of a video from the guy that actually made it. Thanks to Dr. Local for submitting that video. So the guy that actually made this has made a video about it, and that's what he says the price will be. Now, I would caution us that we mustn't assume that is what the final price would be. So Taki has said that. So many retro projects, as they come near to fruition, they find there's costs they weren't anticipating, and the cost goes up. But they're saying $99, £80, 1,000 Swedish krona. So that would be incredible, even if by the time you add shipping and so on, it comes up a little bit. It's a closed source project, and it will likely stay that way for the foreseeable future. There is nothing wrong with that, though. I mean, considerable effort and expense will have gone into the creation of it. So there's nothing wrong with them charging and making money from this. It will certainly bring the cost of MiSTer down if they succeed in bringing it to market and meeting demand. But it's not likely to cross the bridge into what I think would be the new golden age for MiSTer. The project has always been tied to the DE10 Nano development board, which has its limitations. The DE10 is actually fairly powerful in terms of what it can do in terms of the FPGA chip on it. But there are some cores which now might benefit from having something more powerful, and perhaps future cores, if they ever become possible, because I say that if they ever become possible, because as you go up from the PlayStation to the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox and so on, things become exponentially more difficult to do. They would benefit from a more powerful FPGA chip. But more than that, though, it wasn't designed. I mean, Terazek didn't make this with the MiSTer project in mind. So there's limited I/O connectivity. The sound is noisy. There's lots of things that could be improved if it was designed for this. The next phase, I think, for MiSTer, and it's important to know that I'm just an enthusiast. I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm not in the MiSTer project. I'm not designing what it is next. This is just my what I think. Is to produce an all-in-one PCB incorporating the FPGA chip, effectively adding the DE10 replacement into the I/O board to produce one single thing which isn't then dependent on a second board. So this would bring down costs. It would remove many of the current limitations and would potentially mean the creation of something that really could be described as a pre-built, ready-to-go consumer device. And for example, the DE10 itself is not tested to meet emission standards, so it shouldn't be sold as a complete device. The replacement is, I would imagine, I'm guessing here, unlikely to go through that same testing. Maybe I'm wrong, but if it does help in moving the project away from the DE10 itself, that it'll move closer to the direction, which is, I hope, what MiSTer eventually will evolve into. It may not be called MiSTer, but a completely separate fabricated device that's not relying on another device not designed to be in a consumer's home. So we'll go to John first on this, because this is more his field. What do you think about? Do you know anything about the MiSTer? Have you got a MiSTer?
No. I actually had a FPGA arcade or a fork of the MiSTer a while, but I know what it is, and I like the project. People think that I'm against FPGA, etc., but no, I like the FPGA, and that is, I think, the only way to keep old machines running in the end. So I love the idea, and I checked the video, and for that price, I doubt that price will hold in the future because ships tends to be expensive.
Yeah,
So
and of course, when it
yeah,
comes to the Amiga, for example, there are lots of custom chips in the Amiga, and there is, I guess, there's a pecking order of how expensive they are. Things like Buster and the Fat
Yeah, but-
Agnes and all that up the top, and there's other rarer ones. But as those get FPGA replacements, other ones will then become more expensive when they're the sticking point. And I presume you would agree that ultimately FPGA may be the only way to build a brand new Amiga from scratch using a re-Amiga
Yeah.
board, because there's not that many old chips out there to salvage.
Yeah, and people are complaining that people saying emulation. It is hardware emulation. I think the chip manufacturers, the FPGA manufacturers, actually call them hardware emulating. So it's not bad. Emulation is not bad. Yes,
It's not a dirty word.
If the result is good, then it's fine. I mean, that's so it's. But I call it simulation just to tone down the emulation word.
Yeah, and I think when we hear emulation, we're maybe stuck in the ideas of just a PC-based simple emulator. The ones that came out at the end of the 90s were quite basic in terms of what they did. However, they did come out with a wonderful output considering what they were. And this is enormously more complicated and more hardware intensive than that, yeah.
Yeah.
So do you use FPGA chips in any of your own creations?
No, I don't have it on the.
Yeah.
So my stuff is all just to do the original chipset. I have slight ideas that my next version might use replacement chips as because I have an idea maybe for Amiga 40 or a machine that uses a chip that are more or less impossible to get. But they
Which one's
are
that?
they're the Super DMAC.
Yeah, I think you were talking about that. Yeah.
So there are work in progress to have that one as FPGA. So I think that version will instead use the FPGA version as the DMAC is impossible to get. I heard prices of about €1,000 per chip. So it's so crazy. So no. So the only way to do it is with the FPGA.
Yeah, keeps it accessible to people who can afford it, for sure. And even thinking about things like the new terrible fire card that needs an 060 chip. That's not a cheap chip to get hold of, the 060 chip. So
no.
It's cheap if you get a fake. If you get a fake, it's cheap.
Oh, is it?
I think is there, John, is there a problem with 060 fakes, or am I
Oh yes, there are a lot of fakes, reprints. So they send down the text and put text of being revision 6. Instead, they are the version without FPU.
Right.
You want an FPU.
Yeah. So yeah, that will be an issue. I still haven't got an issue getting 060s, but the prices are high.
Yeah, very high. Yeah. Well, Dave, just coming back to some of the things you said there. You mentioned it might not be called the MiSTer in future. I mean, this is a clone. There's no reason for it not to be called the MiSTer and remain the MiSTer project, just using clone hardware.
This will be called MiSTer. I'm thinking about what happens in the future in
long
2, 5, 10 years' time when another project comes along that does what MiSTer does. In the same way that Mist became MiSTer, what will MiSTer become when they move on to new hardware and so on? So I think what's been done with MiSTer will still exist, but it may not become MiSTer.
Yeah. In terms of the hardware, I think a clone or a replacement D10 is actually overdue because the D10 became such a bottleneck for MiSTer builds when when its availability crashed and when its price went up, which availability's got better, but the price is still a lot higher, double the price of what it was. I like the idea. I'm with you. You mentioned the idea of an all-in-one MiSTer, and I think the developers talked about that being a next step. They've talked about possibly making an all-in-one console, I guess like a multi-system, but with the FPGA on board. Great, keeps the cost down, fine. And if it's fully compatible with MiSTer, lovely. Stick that in a nice case, and you've got a great console, like you did or do with the multi-system. But I do like also the option of a detachable D10 or D10 equivalent, because it gives you the options for all the form factors, whether that's the stack, an ITX board, a multi-system. I like options. I don't like projects where someone sort of takes complete control of an aspect of that project, and then gatekeeping. I'm not saying this is happening, but gatekeeping can come into it. Opportunities to make profit can come into it, which can influence decisions. If you've got lots of choice, lots of outlets, lots of places to buy it from, lots of ways to experience a project, then you can make your choice. You're not under the control of one outlet. Yes, Dave.
So I would almost agree with you, but I would like to see it like a slot one motherboard, where what you plug in isn't the full D10. It's not just the FPGA chip plus all the memory plus all the I/O plus an ARM chip in there. I would just like to see that the FPGA part of it be replaceable, because that's the part I think that you might want to choose, having a less expensive FPGA chip in order that you can only do lots of arcade games and 8-bit machines, or you might say, no, I want to do the PlayStation and all the rest of it, so you may have a more expensive one. I think there's too much in the DE10 to be replacing that bit. So I hope if that happens, then
Yeah, a SCART socket is a SCART socket. I don't want to have to buy a new SCART socket when I have a bigger FPGA. Just let me slot in the next FPGA up, because core developers are now making more complex cores, and I can take advantage of that. Great.
Yeah.
Or, I get a cheaper one because I find I'm only playing 16-bit arcade games. I don't need the £200 option. I'll take the £50 option. Thank you very much. Slot that in. Yeah. So I think a clone is great news. You could create something very different and hope that core developers will go to the effort of porting their work over to a whole new platform. But with a clone, it already works out of the box. We've seen that it works. It's been tested on YouTube. I'm sure we'll see lots more testing in the weeks to come. And once clones become normalized and accepted, what's next?
That's a big thing. Big thing.
Yeah, except this is the new normal. There are clones, and I want lots of clones. And here comes another clone with another FPGA chip with lots more gates for the same price, and that can handle even more complex systems. Let's go, everyone. Let's get on board with that one, and let's have clones of that one. That's the path I'd like to see for MiSTer. Lots of competition, prices kept low, availability kept high. Everyone can play on it. Dua Lipa writes a song. It's mainstream. That's where we're going, yeah?
Yeah. So this is not going... The existence of this is not going to achieve what I want in itself, but it may indirectly help build the road for it. You talked about, important thing, getting people used to the idea of using clones, because that then opens people the idea of having a different bit of hardware that still does the MiSTer stuff. And it has happened before. The analog pocket stuff. The analog stuff has lots of MiSTer cores ported to it, and they seem to be relatively easy to do.
Yeah, that's because the core developers have created a framework that makes it easy for them to, easy in their context, to port to the different platforms. I'm sure
200 hours working, we're sitting there going, that was easy. It makes it feasible to do. Let's say feasible rather than easy. That's what will need to happen if the project is going to move on to different hardware. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. But the nice thing about the clones is it's not damaging the MiSTer project. No. The MiSTer project lives on, the cores are made, the framework's made, it just happens to run on the clone. It's not damaging a small hardware maker. Jurassic is part of Intel. It's a huge company, so it's not going to really hurt anyone. It's just going to make a better project for everyone.
And on top of that, if they can be made for $99, why have they put the price up and up and up and charged twice that for them, when if someone else can do it as a small business can do it, then yeah.
Well, let's keep
So
that
maybe
caveat. Let's wait and see the price
Yeah.
it does actually
Yeah.
sell for.
Yeah. They're not yet available. There's a company created to make and sell them on its own, and they're going to sell those, and they talk about selling them integrated into MiSTer units. The creator says, personally, I like going into a market and disrupting it, especially if I can see people getting screwed. My co-founder is the same. People are wondering if the DE10 board will drop in price to compete with us, even though our board isn't meant for education. If they do that, then the clone will drop too. So I'm not bothered whether Tenisic drop their price in line with this. What I picked up from that, though, is Taki, the creator, saying that they could go lower than $99 on this. So if they can sell it for $99 and go lower, then that, for me, says there's maybe further room for people to make even lower price MiSTers.
Could they, or is that just something they're putting out there to say, if you want to have a go at this too, we can go lower, so don't waste your time on it?
Who knows? I don't know.
To be a cynic.
I don't know. The end result of this, though, is hopefully shortly we'll see the price of MiSTers coming right down. I've got one. I love it. It's absolutely brilliant. Switch it on, and I'm in an arcade game in less than a minute. And it's the best emulation that I've ever played. And I've been playing MAME off and on for 20 odd years.
You don't want to miss it. No, it's not to be missed. There you go.
Not to be missed. Yeah, there we go. Not to be missed.
Not to be missed. Time now for our community question of the week. And it was a very short question last week. Based on the ugliness of the Amiga, we came up with the question, what is the most uncool computer? That's it. What computer is uncool? Dave, have you taken us out of contest mode?
I'm just doing it. I've noticed, though, that all of the answers, just one after the other, to just say, the Amiga, the Amiga, the Amiga.
I think you're looking at the wrong page, Dave.
No, that's not true. It won't let me. It's doing this nonsense again that stopped it happening before. Let me just hack the URL to get the thing up. There we go. Disable contest mode. And we're slammed out of contest mode.
We're done.
Shall I go first?
So,
you want to go first?
I'll go first. It's from Fuskit. And they say the BBC Micro was pretty uncool to a 6-year-old in 1986 because it was the school computer and all you ever saw it do was boring educational stuff. I will draw a shape on the screen. If you type in how many sides you want to press the enter key, types 100. I can't do that many. Here's a shape with 72 sides. That's a circle, you bleeping idiot. Just recounting his own experience with the BBC Micro there. I didn't find out about Elite or even John Chucky Egg Hurtle until years later. Wow.
Are you aware of Chucky Egg, Chucky?
I have heard about it. Yeah. Quite a few times.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer. Anything that was in the school was pretty boring. Yeah. Some people are saying it's subjective. Yes, my dad was a teacher. Yes, but it did have great asteroids, Frogger, Pac-Man, Defender clones, says Osprey Shower. Yeah, I mean, you can defend it. But the BBC Micro, uncool. I think in the middle ground. I'm not going to give it uncool. I'm suddenly I've turned into a judge. No, BBC Micro not uncool. Dave, uncool or cool? BBC Micro.
BBC Micro is cool. Elite.
John, BBC Micro, cool or uncool?
It's cool because I've never actually seen one.
Okay.
In person. Yeah, because it was not a thing here in Sweden. So
did you have an equivalent? Was it a Swedish microcomputer that everyone had in schools?
In schools in Sweden, we have a computer called Kompis. That's a friend in Swedish, based on the 186 CPU CPM version. Yeah. So they use that one in Sweden, and before that one, they use a machine called SLT100 that kind of looks like the C64. So we were using weird machines here.
But the name translates to friend.
Yeah, Kompis. Yeah, friend.
Just like Amiga.
Yes.
Yeah, but that one was not an Amiga for sure. But it was strange that you use a 186 Not the 286 or 86.
Few things did, yeah.
Yeah.
Dave, do you want to read the next answer?
The next one is Osprey Shower, and he says the RM Nimbus computer used in some UK schools in the late 80s and early 90s. For many of us, this was our first introduction to a PC, although it wasn't IBM compatible, and it used what kind of processor do you think it used, Chucky? A 186. Yeah.
Ooh.
That's weird. It doesn't evoke the nostalgia of the BBC or the Archimedes, and it didn't feel like the future like the 386s did when we finally moved on to PC compatibles. They may have been really good, but at the time I assumed they were generic, cheap alternatives to the latest Archimedes computers.
It's a cool looking machine though. Have you seen one? Wasn't it in like a black rack mounted case thing? Am I thinking about the same thing?
I didn't know there was a 186 thing. I thought RM Nimbus computers were PC compatibles. I know they did do eventually RM ones, but I didn't realise they did. They did their own thing.
I'm thinking about the RM380Z, which is like a black rack mounted thing. Some people do ask for that when they come to the cave. I don't have one. I didn't use one back in the day, but obviously some people have fond memories because it was their school computer. We had BBC Micros. I'm going to say mid-table to slightly uncool, but I'm not going to give it the full uncool rating, that one, I'm afraid.
I think, Neil, that you like computers enough that you'd never say any was really uncool if you gave it any thought at all.
The Mattel Aquarius, uncool.
You're only saying that because no one's really a big fan of it. You're not going to offend anyone.
It's a toy. I'm going to skip over the next few answers. We've got Lord Borak, who says BBC Micro. Chromatic Core says... Oh, Acorn Electron. I thought they said BBC Micro. They said, well, many say the BBC Micro. I'm going to say the least cool micro to admit to owning in the playground was definitely its little brother, the Acorn Electron. I know this as I had one. While the cool kids were all exaggerating about their accomplishments or totally not made up discovered secrets within the latest ZX Spectrum or C64 games, I was swapping tapes amongst themselves. Or borrowing them from the local library, as that was very much a thing in Scotland. I was restricted to swapping games with one of my dad's colleagues in work, which many years later it turned out was really just him buying the games for me, likely in pity, from the corner store near his office, who happened to carry a carousel of Electron games every couple of weeks. Yes, the Elk really was the least cool computer for a kid to own in the 80s. He makes a very strong argument there. I think it's a cool-looking computer, but that is a very uncool experience. Nobody in your school would swap games with you. A random work colleague of your dad would buy you games out of pity and give them to you.
Yeah. That's a very interesting answer from Rowan Forrest. The most uncool computer is the Norwegian Tiki 100. This was the Norwegian equivalent of the BBC Micro used in schools, but unlike the BBC, almost completely lacking games and such. Is that the one you just mentioned?
No.
Tiki,
no.
Right,
okay.
Norway had a different machine.
Norway is a different country, Dave.
I know, but there's a bit of crossover.
It's a kind of crossover, yeah.
Yeah.
Plenty of other answers. Chris 005 Agima says the Master System 2 is ugly and uncool. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Compared to the Master System 1. Who else have we got here? Squelch 411, the Amstrad PCW. Oh, controversial.
Lovely.
Tompalumpan, what a name. The Macintosh SE.
We've got an uncool computer for you.
Tech Made Easy, my dad's Dell Dimension with a 600 megahertz Celeron. Yes, I'm going to put anything with a Celeron in the uncool box.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted a Celeron.
It's got a Celeron.
Oz Retrocomp, iMac G4 lampshade. I've just put one of those on display in the cave for people to play on because I think it's so cool. But he says the designers tried way too hard to make something quirky, and this led to arguably the most naff looking computer ever made. Oh, I like it. I like the lamp Mac. There's Mike Daly, MDF. He says Mattel Aquarius. We're on the same page.
Do you know what I don't like? I don't like that Mac that was transparent, the kind of bluish transparent Mac that was a CRT
the iMac.
built in.
Yeah.
The iMac.
The iMac G is that the G3?
Yeah, I don't like that.
The G3. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Well, it revived Apple's fortunes, or it came at the time when Apple's fortunes were being revived. It's the first full product that Steve Jobs launched when he came back to Apple. So it's all sort of tied up in that bit of history.
Jobby.
Loads and loads of answers there. Thank you to everyone who took part. Reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro. And that leads us to this week's question of the week off the back of our online services conversation and games dying. Question simply is, what game would you be most sad to never be able to play again? Doesn't have to be a game that actually has online dependencies. It can be any game from any time. What would you be gutted to not be able to load ever again?
Gutted.
Gutted.
Was that your Duncan impression?
It was. Yeah. So gutted. Thank you so much to John for joining us today. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime in the future. Good luck with your projects. Go and check out John's blog using the link in the show notes, and follow the progress of his. Is the 4000 CR the current project, or have you finished?
Well, it's finished. I will do something more, but that will be for Amiga 40.
Yeah, fantastic.
So quite long development times. Yeah.
It's only been 30 years since Commodore crashed. What's the rush? It's fine. We got plenty of time.
Amiga's dead.
Dave, you ruined it right at the end. Dave.
No more hair.
I don't mean it.
And if you really enjoy the show and would like to support what we do, head to, where do we go? Patreon.com/This Week in Retro. Join our many twirlers, and also our chat server, discord.gg/RMC Retro. See you there. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
They're waving. Keep waving, John. You can't stop waving. Wave. Wave more.
Thank you for coming on.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.